Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're digging into the world of Pietro Ubaldi. He was an Italian thinker born back in 1886 who later moved to Brazil. Quite a life, and his work covered a really incredible range of topics.
Yeah, absolutely. And our mission here really is to get to the heart of Ubaldi's ideas. We'll be drawing a lot from Luca Marzetti's introduction to his work, which, fittingly enough, is called Jacob's Ladder.
Jacob's Ladder. That title immediately makes you think of climbing, of ascent, right? Which seems central to Ubaldi.
It really is.
And what strikes me is this concept Marzetti highlights unification. Can we unpack that a bit? It sounds like using intuition to see the deeper meaning in things and raise our consciousness.
Exactly. It's about bridging gaps, seeing the connections between science, spirituality, everyday life. Everything is a really holistic approach.
Holistic, okay. And you see that in the sheer scope of his work, right? His opera, 24 books, covering science, religion, ethics, even economics and politics.
It's staggering, isn't it? Written across Italy and Brazil, it just shows the scale of his ambition, this drive to unify different fields of knowledge.
It's kind of mind-boggling for one person. And it's interesting how differently he was received. Sort of ostracized in Italy, but a major figure in Brazil.
Yes, fascinating. In Brazil, he was seen almost as foundational, connecting scientific and spiritual thought. He even got nominated for a Nobel Prize in Literature in '64.
Wow. Why the difference, do you think?
Well, it could be the cultural context. Perhaps Brazil was more receptive to that kind of holistic, spiritual, scientific blend at the time. And Marzetti points to this key moment, hearing the word evolution as a student.
Ah, right. That apparently hit him hard.
Profoundly. It seems to have sparked his entire lifelong quest.
Okay, so let's dive into that. His view of evolution and society. We mentioned ascent. What did that mean for him specifically?
Well, it wasn't just Darwinian evolution, biological change. For Ubaldi, evolution was this continuous climb upwards, expanding our minds, our understanding. Jacob's ladder is the perfect symbol for it.
And he applied this to society, too.
Definitely. He saw humanity moving towards what he called an organic state.
Organic, meaning more interconnected, like a single organism, inspired by the Gospels I read.
Precisely. A society built on increasing cooperation, not just for material stuff, but for social and, crucially, spiritual well-being, too. He thought individual ethics would eventually become collective practice.
That sounds incredibly optimistic, especially today. Did he think our struggles would change focus then?
Yes, he really did. He envisioned a shift, less conflict between nations, more higher-level cooperation.
Like what?
Think about big international scientific projects or global efforts to fight hunger, disease, injustice, that kind of thing. He saw that becoming the main arena for human effort.
That really speaks to our current global situation, doesn't it? So how does this happen, this raising of consciousness?
He talked about two key processes, sensitization and harmonization.
Sensitization and harmonization, like tuning into something.
Sort of. Becoming more sensitive to deeper realities, and then aligning, harmonizing our individual consciousness with the larger whole, the cosmic reality.
Okay, so evolution as ascent, society becoming organic and cooperative, consciousness rising through sensitization. Got it. Now, another big piece is science and faith. He saw them coming together.
Absolutely. He was convinced they weren't enemies. He saw both moving past their limitations, faith beyond superstition, science beyond pure materialism, to meet at a higher level.
Meeting where?
Meeting divine thought. He believed in an immanent God, a presence you could perceive right down to the level of the atom as well as in the cosmos.
And wasn't Einstein a bit of an admirer?
He was. Einstein apparently called Ubaldi's system sweet and light, and he had that great quote,
Oh, yeah.
"The ladder of science is like Jacob's ladder. It ends at the feet of God." Perfectly captures Ubaldi's view, doesn't it?
Yeah, it really does. That's quite an endorsement. But Ubaldi wasn't just a mystic, right? He had serious academic credentials.
Oh, definitely. Law degree, music degree, fluent in several languages. His law thesis on Italian-Brazilian relations was actually published.
So he had the intellectual chops.
For sure. But here's the twist. He found formal education deeply unsatisfying. He then went into this worldly period, as he called it. Lots of intense personal experience, including, apparently, quite a bit of pain and struggle.
Ah, learning from life, not just books, which probably shaped his big work, The Great Synthesis.
That's the cornerstone, yeah. Published in 1935, 100 chapters laying out his whole system. His Summa, you could say.
100 chapters. And didn't he, like, predict World War II before writing it?
It's pretty remarkable. In 1932, he apparently wrote to Mussolini and Pope Pius VII, warning them about a coming catastrophe in Europe.
Wow, okay. And did the Great Synthesis also explain his method? How he got these insights?
Yes, he talks about it more in Lunuri. It was a two-step process. First, inspirational, intuitive, then analytical.
So intuition first, then reason to structure it.
Kind of. He even compared his own experiences, his parapsychological case he called it, to figures like Francis of Assisi or Joan of Arc, suggesting a similar source of inspiration.
And he had a specific name for this connection. Ultraphania. What was that about?
Right, ultraphania. He described it as active, conscious, telepathic communication with what he called a nuri.
A nuri, like a current of thought.
Yeah, a higher stream of thought accessible to people who were, sensitized. And he said this developed over 40 years, from just receiving insight to actively collaborating with it.
40 years. That's dedication. Okay, so building on that, let's get into some core concepts. His great equation of substance, ME equals C equals substance.
Yes. Matter equals energy equals spirit equals substance. For him, they weren't separate things.
Just different faces of the same thing.
Exactly. Different aspects of one fundamental substance. He even linked this idea to the mystery of the Trinity.
That's a big leap, connecting physics, spirit, and theology. His view of God sounds pretty all-encompassing, too. Monistic.
He was a monist, yes. God is all that exists, all that is life. But he was careful.
Careful how?
Not simple pantheism, where God is just the universe. For Ubaldi, God is immanent in everything, but also transcendent, beyond everything.
Okay, so both within and beyond creation.
Right. And he talked about a super force, or a universal law governing everything.
Law, like laws of physics.
More fundamental than that, he actually equated this law with God, and he linked it directly to ethics.
So the same law governs the stars and how we should treat each other.
That's the implication. It's a deeply integrated view.
And how do we grasp this law? Through intuition again.
Yes, intuition was key. He saw it as the bridge between science and faith, the way to access the profound heart of reality. Truth, he thought, is eternal, but we only grasp it bit by bit as we mature, as we evolve.
So intuition isn't just a guess, it's a faculty for perceiving truth directly. Which brings us to the tough question. Evil. How did Ubaldi handle that? If God is all and the law is good.
Good question. He drew on Augustine here. Evil isn't a thing in itself, not an ontological reality. It's a lack, a privation of good.
Like darkness is the absence of light.
Precisely. He saw it as a necessary downward movement, an involution that actually serves the larger purpose of future ascent, future evolution.
A dip before the climb.
Kind of, but cyclical. He saw evolution happening in phases, periods of evolution and periods of involution, but crucially,
Yes.
the progress made in earlier evolutionary phases isn't lost during involution, it's preserved.
So we don't slide all the way back down. And time fits into this how.
Time serves evolution.
Yeah.
It's guided by the law, by God. History isn't random. It has a direction, a goal.
That's very different from, say, Nietzsche's eternal recurrence.
Very different. No Sisyphus pushing the rock forever. Ubaldi saw a path, a destination.
And pain, suffering, where does that fit?
He saw pain as fundamental to life, unfortunately, but also as a catalyst. It forces us to reflect. It drives change, pushes evolution forward. Ultimately, he believed it leads towards a kind of collective resurrection, a Pasqua of resurrection, he called it, for humanity, leading to the new civilization of the third millennium.
Okay, this new civilization, that sounds like the payoff. What did he imagine it would be like?
He saw it as a time when the Superman, the fully realized human, is achieved individually.
We'll come back to how his Superman differs from Nietzsche's.
Right. And collectively, it's where the principles of the gospel are actually lived out by society. The Sermon on the Mount becoming like historical reality.
Wow. Love your neighbor, turn the other cheek as actual social norms.
That was the vision. Truly transformative.
And how does something like education play into this?
For Ubaldi, education and evolution were tightly linked to this ultimate goal, this eschatological vision. He saw it as a lifelong process of self-transformation, kind of like Kierkegaard's idea of becoming Christian.
So individual growth drives societal transformation. What about all the crises we see? Wars, pandemics, disasters. How did he view those?
As storms of purification. Painful, destructive, yes, but containing constructive impulses. They force us to confront our failings and choose. Despair or reach for something higher, spiritually.
Tough medicine, but maybe necessary for growth.
That was his perspective. They push us to evolve.
Let's circle back to intuition. He really stressed it as a way of knowing, didn't he? More than just reason or senses.
He absolutely did. A primary research method for him. He felt deductive and inductive logic,
Yeah.
and science based purely on senses could only take you so far. Intuition accessed something deeper.
And he had that technique, epike, suspending judgment.
Yes, epike. It was about creating a science of life, using the system of the mystics, setting aside your biases, your reliance on just the physical senses, and using the eyes of the soul to see the inner realities
Eyes of the soul. And this connects to his experiences with the New Re again.
directly. That telepathic communication. But he insisted it wasn't passive, like a trance. It was active, conscious participation.
Okay. And he saw this intuitive capacity as universal, not just for mystics.
Yeah, he believed it was a fundamental unity of inspiration, shared by Socrates, Buddha, artists, poets, musicians,
It's just manifests differently depending on the person and their field.
the common source, different expressions. Okay, now let's shift to his ideas about God and our place in the cosmos. He talked about God's egocentrism. That
That's-
sounds odd.
It does sound paradoxical, doesn't it? But he didn't mean selfish egoism. He meant an ego so infinitely expanded that it includes everything.
So God's self-interest is the interest of all creation.
Exactly. Maximal altruism through maximal egocentrism, if you can wrap your head around that.
Okay, thinking. And we, as creatures, as God's children, we have freedom.
Original freedom, yes, like sparks of God, inheriting that liberty. But with freedom comes responsibility, the need to align with the law for cosmic harmony, and the foundation of that harmony.
Let me guess. Love. That's the bedrock of the spiritual universe for Ubaldi.
So where does the bad stuff, the disorder, come from?
From misuse of that freedom. Individual ego, pride, leading some sparks to go beyond their limits, detached from the system. He compared them to cancerous cells.
Okay, disrupting the harmony. Now, you can't talk Ubaldi without talking Christ. He seems absolutely central.
Utterly central. The biotype of the universe, he called him. The point where science and faith perfectly converge.
And his take on Christ and reincarnation was interesting.
Yeah, he didn't see Christ as negating reincarnation. He seemed to treat it almost as a given self-evident.
That's definitely not mainstream theology. What about karma?
He saw negative karma, the baggage from past mistakes stored in our subconscious, as a tool for redemption.
How so?
By understanding why we suffer the consequences, the law reacting, enduring that pain consciously, and then, crucially, stopping the behavior that caused it. Learning the lesson, basically.
Makes sense. Turn mistakes into growth. Now back to the Superman idea. How did Ubaldi's differ from Nietzsche's?
Okay, so Nietzsche's Superman stays faithful to the earth, embraces the eternal return, finds meaning in this life, repeated forever. Ubaldi's Superman also accepts suffering, yes, even crucifixion, but sees as part of an upward path, an ascent towards spiritual transcendence beyond the purely earthly cycle.
Got it. Ascent again. So did Ubaldi think this new civilization was actually close? Did he see signs?
He did. He believed it was imminent, or at least the foundations needed laying urgently. He looked at signs of the times.
Like what?
Things like growing global interconnectedness, a sense of planetary consciousness despite all the conflicts. He called it the law of collective units.
An emerging global awareness?
Yeah, he saw an evolution happening beyond just using force or trickery, moving towards organic coordination. And interestingly, this wasn't about destroying egoism,
No.
but expanding it, a dilation of ego into a more utilitarian altruism where helping the whole becomes self-interested. He even saw movements like communism, despite their flaws, as maybe playing a role in shaking people out of complacency.
That's a challenging thought.
Mm.
And work. How did he see our jobs fitting in?
Not just a paycheck. He saw work as a vocation, a mission for spiritual growth, more about being than having, to use Eric Fromm's terms, contributing to the whole.
Or a much deeper view of work. Now, Ubaldi himself was maybe a bit of a heretic in some ways. What did he think about that label?
He had sympathy for heretics,
Yeah.
often seeing them as genuine truth seekers repressed by institutions. He questioned if the label even made sense anymore. He definitely saw a tension between the core gospel message and the church as an institution, which has to navigate politics and conflict, sometimes compromising Christ's radical teachings.
The ideal versus the reality of institutions.
Right. But he also believed in the unity behind all religions, the semina verbi, seeds of the word. He wanted ecumenism based on inner growth, not just institutional agreement.
Beyond just Christian unity.
Oh yeah, encompassing all genuine spiritual paths.
Yeah.
And he interpreted Christ's silence before Pilate about what is truth,
Quite profoundly.
as showing that truth can't really be explained or given to those who represent systems built on power and violence. It has to be lived, experienced.
Hmm. Powerful. Let's touch on the Trinity again. His view was a bit different.
The little. He saw the Trinity as three moments within the one God: intelligence, will, and individuation. It fit his monistic view, but kept that Trinitarian structure. Different phrasing maybe, but connects to ideas like us being children of God.
Okay. And finally, Christ's role in this cosmic battle. He described the system versus the anti-system. What did those mean?
The system is the divine order, harmony, positive evolution. The anti-system is chaos, involution, negativity. Christ, as the Word made flesh, guides humanity out of the anti-system towards the system.
So Christ is leading the charge, basically.
In a sense, he saw Christ embodying God's immanence, but still operating within this duality. And the fall, for Ubaldi, wasn't the creation of the system, but the creation of our physical universe.
How did that happen?
When beings with free will misused it, exceeded their limits, and fell into the anti-system, creating this denser reality.
And Christ's suffering and crucifixion in this picture.
Ubaldi focused more on the risen Christ, the glorious Christ in spirit. Suffering belonged to the human condition, the realm of the anti-system. Christ's silence before Pilate again shows the disconnect.
Right, Pilate couldn't grasp it.
Exactly. The crucifixion was the anti-system doing its worst. But Christ's forgiveness, Father, forgive them, showed his detachment, his victory over it. The resurrection wasn't just coming back to life.
It was.
A greater like in the spirit, a transformation, a dematerialization. He liked Gibran's view of Jesus as a hero, not just a victim. The cross wasn't the end, but a transition point.
The ultimate symbol of the system overcoming the anti-system.
That's a good way to put it.
Wow. Okay, we have covered so much ground here. A really deep dive into Ubaldi's focus on evolution and ultimately hope. But, ideas this big inevitably raise questions, criticisms.
Oh, absolutely. From a strictly materialistic view, you'd ask, where's the proof? For the law, for the soul's immortality, for this Nuri current.
Right. Science and traditional theology might also challenge the heavy reliance on intuition, the perhaps unproven assumptions. Some might even call his view of God atheism by assimilation. God is so big, he becomes everything and nothing specific.
These are valid critiques depending on your starting point, your epistemology.
Definitely things to wrestle with.
For sure. But to really get the feel of Ubaldi, you almost have to read something like his Prayer of the Wayfarer. It captures his attitude towards suffering, acceptance, seeing perfection even in imperfection.
Can you share a bit of that?
It starts, "Nothing can I ask of thee, for all is already perfect and just in thy creation, even my suffering, even my passing imperfection. In thy contemplation I rest." It's about profound acceptance.
That's quite a perspective, a deep trust in the ultimate order.
It is. And Marzetti nails it when he says that for Ubaldi to exist means to be globally. Everything is connected. Science, art, ethics, spirituality. It's all one system. He really comes across as a prophet of hope in a time, much like ours, facing huge challenges despite all our tech.
So, for listeners wanting to explore Ubaldi further, what's the best way in? It sounds potentially overwhelming.
Well, Alessio Galati gave some good advice. Don't just treat it as an intellectual puzzle.
Meaning?
Approach it with some humility and openness. Try not to read it through rigid, preconceived ideas. Think about Einstein's reaction. He found it sweet and light, suggesting an intuitive resonance, not just a logical dissection.
So be open, be receptive, maybe let the intuition play a role in understanding intuition.
Something like that. It's an invitation, really.
Yeah.
To explore Ubaldi's vast opera, consider if his ideas speak to our modern search for meaning, for connection, for a way forward.
A fascinating journey, no doubt. Thank you for guiding us through it today.
My pleasure. It's deep stuff.
It certainly is, and definitely gives you, the listener, plenty to think about. Thanks for joining us on the deep dive.